Grief, Grief Work, and Mourning. Sigmund Freud, the famous Austrian psychoanalyst, was the RST to formally address the nature of grief, see Chapter 2, and its function, see Chapter 3, in Mourning and Melancholia in 1917. Mourning describes the bereaved person's attempts to read, nay, their relationship to the deceased, their sense of self, and the external world. Successful mourning, according to Freud, involves the severing of loss, bereavement, grief. What do they mean? Excerpted from the Psychology of Grief Chapter 772, the emotional ties to the deceased and investing emotional energy in new relationships. This emotional separation from the loved one is achieved through grief work, rather than mourning work, and is central to a number of well-known and influential theories, models of grief, see Chapters 2 and 3. However, mourning is also used in a very different sense to denote the culturally patterned expressions or rituals that accompany loss and allow others to recognize that one has become bereaved. 14 public displays of grief include funerals, wearing black clothes or armbands, and covering mirrors in Jewish homes. People are often described as being in mourning for a deceased loved one. Their normal routines and activities are suspended until the period of mourning is over, see Chapter 4. It would be very odd to describe them as being in grieving, rather than just grieving, which denotes the individual response to bereavement, as opposed to social rituals and traditions. How down o what WEKNOWABOUT grief. Personal accounts. One major source of information about the nature of grief are the personal accounts of bereaved individuals. Many such accounts have been written by well-known authors, such as C.S. Lewis, Danny Absey, and Julian Barnes, but also include RST time authors, driven to describing their grief both as a way of coming to terms with their loss and as a form of dedication to their loved one. These accounts tell us how grief is experienced. Arguably, these RST hand accounts capture the nature of grief more accurately than any other method, see Chapter 2. Clinical studies. Freud's Mourning and Melancholia represents a more detached, less personal account, but one which ECTS a particular theoretical bias, namely psychoanalytic theory, sometimes psychoanalysis. Although Freud's ideas are important in their own right, it is his influence on later theorists and researchers, including Bowlby and Parks, that makes him such a key figure in the clinical study of grief, i.e. the treatment of bereaved people whose grief may be described as complicated, informing us about the nature of both this and normal grief. These later theories are discussed in Chapters 2 and 3. Empirical studies. Probably most of what we understand about grief derives from research studies. Loss, bereavement, grief. What do they mean? Excerpted from the Psychology of Grief Chapter 773, involving large numbers of bereaved people, as opposed to individuals, as in personal accounts and clinical studies. These empirical, i.e. scientific, evidence-based studies are often conducted by psychiatrists, such as Parks, in order to understand the circumstances under which bereavement can lead to psychiatric disorders and to set up programs of treatment and prevention. 4 such influential studies are the Bethlehem, London, Harvard, and Love and Loss studies. The Bethlehem study investigated reactions to bereavement among 21 people, male and female, seeking psychiatric help on average 72 weeks following the death. Interviews were conducted at the Bethlehem Royal and Maudsley Hospitals, in London. The London study attempted to find out how an unselected group of widows under 65 would cope within the RST year of bereavement, i.e. they weren't seeking psychiatric help. They were interviewed at the end of the RST, 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 13th months, allowing for the anniversary reaction. The Harvard study involved 68 unselected widows and widowers, aged 45 and under, at Harvard Medical School in Boston, Massachusetts. They were interviewed 14 months after bereavement and compared with a control group of 68 married men and women of the same age, social class background, and family size. Finally, the Love and Loss study involved 278 psychiatric outpatients at the Royal London Hospital and was aimed at testing the hypothesis that love and loss are inseparable, that childhood attachment patterns, separations from parents, and relationships in later life all end. Nuance how we cope with stress and loss and predict the kinds of problems which cause people to seek help following bereavement in adult life. A control group of 78 young women who hadn't sought any psychiatric help was used, 35 of whom had suffered bereavement in the previous years. Anthropological and ethnographic studies. These studies attempt to identify patterns of grief across different cultures and so are essential for testing the claim that grief is a universal reaction to bereavement, see page XX. Traditionally, such studies have focused on rituals and beliefs surrounding death, in particular regarding the afterlife, rather than the psychological, i.e. individual, aspects of grief. A widely made distinction is that between individualistic, typically Western industrialized, capitalist, and collectivist, non-Western, traditional, societies, cultures, see Chapter 4. Loss. BEREAVEMENTAND. Grief. What do they mean? Excerpted from the Psychology of Grief Chapter 7.7.4, Istheria POSITIVESIDETOGRIEF. Finally, bereavement is conventionally regarded as just about the worst thing that can happen to a person and, by the same token, grief is seen as an inherently negative experience? By definition, painful and unpleasant. However, research conducted within positive psychology has shown that trauma of various kinds, including sudden and traumatic bereavement, can serve as a catalyst for positive changes. This is referred to as post-traumatic growth, PTG.